There's also Thank you very much. We are asking that you keep your mic muted to avoid background noise during the discussion. We're happy if you have your camera on or off. We're just happy that you're here joining us. And feel free to engage in the chat box. And so we have a lot of questions that we have pre-planned, but we would definitely want to be answering and responding to some of your questions. If you have a question that you'd like to verbally ask us, we're just going to ask until the end of the session. There will be a couple of moments, but please feel free to put a note in the chat box so we know that you're interested. Also, another option is to raise your hand in Zoom before unmuting at the end of the session, and we'll call on you to have a chit chat and to ask your question. And we're also going to be sharing this information with you afterwards. We'll be sharing some of the information about our training and different things going forward, as well as Blaiken's contact information in case you're looking for a little bit of extra help. So if you have additional questions that you don't want to be public and you just would like to ask us directly, that's also absolutely no problem. You can send us a note at hello@ethicaldigital.ca. And also, if you're having any tech issues, you can just pop us a note at hello@ethicaldigital.ca, and someone's monitoring that account to help you out. So all the information has been shared. Let's dive into the reason that you are all here. Let's get to the bottom of some information about social media addiction. So very first, let's just get to know you a little bit, Blaiken. Tell us about how you got into this type of work.
Yeah, so it started off with just a fascination with technology in general. So I grew up, well, I was born in 85, so I had a lot of exposure to technology in the kind of growth of the internet and social media. So I started off with not so much technology and then shifting into it. So that exposure has always been something I've had a hobby in. Professionally, I started working with children in residential centers. So I early on got an exposure to children using tech in a way that first intrigued me because they were using video games, they were using social media, and as time went on, I started noticing that it became more concerning. So I went to a shift from working with kids into getting my master's degree in family counseling because I realized that if I wanted to help children, I had to help parents and families. And that's when I started to really see how technology affects families and people in general. So I worked with more of the extreme cases of children who struggles with video game addictions and social media addiction to the point where children were physically assaulting family members, needing to go to the hospital for suicidal threats when they didn't get their phones. And at that point, I recognized that technology and these addictions were more serious than I had ever anticipated. So I started to study this. I've spent years reading a lot of peer-reviewed studies on this topic, technology addictions at large, and then eventually founded the Center for Tech Wellness to help people address this.
Amazing. And, as a person, I have teenagers, so I hear exactly what you're saying and seeing about how this really does affect families. And I know there's a lot of people who are also interested in, how this affects their workplaces as well. And so before we get into that, that sort of angle of it, let's actually talk about what's the difference between addiction and, that kind of a label, and then the normal use of social media.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you're bringing this up because I think a lot of people don't understand this distinction and they assume that because they use social media a lot that they're addicted to it. If you ask a typical person if they're addicted to technology, they'll jokingly say yes, right? And the facts of the matter is that about 5% of social media users are actually addicted to social media. So over the past decade, there have been different attempts to try to figure out how we can determine who has social media addiction. And there have been different study groups and research teams to try figuring this out. But there are two elements that have been consistent amongst all of these teams from different cultures. And those two are an inability to stop using, right? So you're having a very strong difficulty stopping your use. And the second is that it is creating a significant problem in your life. So some examples of that could be losing a job because you're excessively using social media. It could be losing relationships. because you're frequently using. And for children, it can be failing classes or, missing out on a grade because they're on social media a lot. So those are two elements. There are other elements, but those are the two primary ones that would distinguish somebody who has an addiction from somebody who's engaging a lot.
I like that. So do you happen to like maybe have a couple of questions that maybe you could ask yourself, if you're like, hey, I might be on the line, what kind of things would you ask yourself?
So I think first you would want to see if there are any problems that are really arising. I think what's difficult about that question, I actually need to preface this, is that people are notoriously bad at self-observation, especially when it comes to negative aspects of their personality, right? So if any of you have ever had somebody struggling with drug addiction, for example, or if you know a friend who has, I know I have, you'll notice that they struggle to recognize there even is a problem, right? So first, I'm gonna take it with a grain of salt. I'm gonna take it that this person has great insight and can ask these questions and be honest with themselves. And if they can, they would benefit from looking at things like the social media addiction scale that has been developed more recently. And some of the questions could be: is this causing a problem in my life? Have I made attempts in the past year or so that I've failed to achieve? Right. So I've tried to stop using in cases, and I haven't been able to do it. So those are the two major ones going back to what we just talked about. But some other ones can be, am I using technology or social media in a way to adjust distressing aspects of my life? So as you know, social media addiction is highly correlated with escapism and a tendency for people to want to step out of their lives because of distressing elements of it, right? So if you have somebody who has low life satisfaction, maybe really stressed out at work, stressed out with kids, they may want to escape into social media. It's a way to cope with it. Um, there are other ones too. I don't want to go too far into it, but those are some general questions that you could ask in general to understand if you have social media addiction or not.
I like that. I like that. We'll probably track down that exam or something and send that out to people too, so that people can have some fun and go through and ask themselves some of those hard questions. Let's actually break this down even a little bit further for individuals. And so, how does the problematic use of social media affect children, and then teens, and then more specifically families?
Yeah, so I think I would first start off with everybody in general. So everybody, you would mention some of the things that it's associated with. So social media addiction is associated with anxiety, depression, and some other mental health diagnoses like compulsivity, impulsivity, eating disorders. So I've opened up the Center for Technology Wellness, but I also am the director of a crisis program for children. And one of the more disturbing trends that I'm seeing are younger and younger children, particularly girls, who are developing eating disorders. It used to be shocking to see an 11-year-old with an eating disorder and who would talk about social media and how they use it. And now I'm seeing children as young as 8, 7. They're getting younger by the year. So there are a lot of negative associations with social media addiction, and it's something not to take lightly. Um, when you get into age gaps, so you start off with children, I first would want to just point out that a lot of the issues or the problems that arise from social media use isn't necessarily children using it, but parents using it. So when parents are excessively using social media to the point where they're addicted to it, they're not paying attention to their kids as much, right? I like to use the analogy of I call it the technology family seesaw. So as family experiences go down, technology use can go up. And if technology use goes down, then family experiences can go up, right? So we're starting to see this shift in society where family experiences are going down and that people are getting on phones and social media more, right? So we all, I think, need to take a step back and think about what that means for ourselves as people, as parents, um, and family members. Um,
I'm going to go off.
sorry. Mhm.
I'm going to go off script a little bit too, just to, just to dive into that a little bit further.
Yep.
If a family is discovering that their use collectively is problematic, what are some of the things that you've seen that are actual immediate actions that a family can take to start to change that teeter totter, I guess?
Yeah. Absolutely. So, as a family therapist, I'll say this from my perspective and what's been most helpful. Generally, and this can apply to business as well. I know that this is a conversation. I think it ties to that as well. Is that in family therapy, we typically, not always, but we typically target what's known as the executive subsystem. So that are the parents primarily. In a business, it would be the leaders. And for them to come together and to figure out what the problems might be and to talk about that. So the first thing I'd want to do with a family in particular is to talk to the people at the top. What are they noticing? Why is it a problem? And have them define why they want to address this issue in the first place. So that would be the first step. Do you have a follow up? I don't know if that answered
Yeah,
your
no, that's
question.
great. Yeah, yeah. No, that's interesting. Yeah. And then are there like just small actions that you've seen that can be quite effective in families for changing these cycles?
Yes. So some small actions can be addressing technology. So when you're looking at this relationship, a lot of people I found overly focused on technology and not on the human aspects. So if you look at technical solutions, let's call them that, it could be no tech times, right? Dinner is an outstanding time to build relationships with your family. If the television's on, if people are on social media while they're trying to talk to their children, this can diminish communication and have a host of negative impacts for the children and for the parents. So I would encourage people to figure out times of the day where you're not using technology and stick to it. That's extremely important for children. Um, I think also if you want to address some of the dynamics of problematic tech use, it comes down to family communication styles. That's a big element as well. So having conversations about tech use and determining what the boundaries are going to be. I'll give you a quick example with teenagers. That's actually pretty interesting. If there are studies that suggest that children who can verbalize the boundaries of technology to their parents or to other people, meaning that they can say, these are the rules of my home, I know this. Those children are less likely to have social media addiction than children who don't, right?
Interesting.
So it goes beyond a parent saying, here are the rules, right? So you can't do X, you can't do Y, right? It goes to the child obtaining that information and being able to verbalize it in a way that they understand it, right? So that's a key element. And it comes down to communication with parents and their children.
Well, I know what I'm doing tonight. I'm asking my teenagers what they think the rules are.
Yeah. Yeah.
We might have to get this centered a little bit more in our family. So this presentation is also for people in business as well. And but we like to bring our whole selves to these types of conversations. So I definitely think the family conversation is important as well. But let's shift gears a little bit. And also just a reminder to those listening, feel free to put any questions that you have in the chat, specifically as we're moving kind of away from the family questions and moving into a bit more business questions. This is a great time to get some additional one-on-one time with Blake in here. So please feel free to pop your questions in the chat. So let's actually shift gears though and talk about workplaces and how does the problematic use of social media actually affect those workplaces?
So you could look at this at a lot of levels. At the individual level, if someone is struggling with social media addiction, meaning an employee, they are less likely to be productive. They're also more likely to have stress in their life, which is going to impact work-life balance. It's going to impact their ability to communicate with colleagues. So it's going to hit them on a lot of different levels, both at home and at work. Um, Interestingly, when studies have looked into this in more detail, one of the things that they found that social media addiction particularly affected was job satisfaction in general. So people with social media addiction report lower job satisfaction, perhaps because they want to be on social media more, right? Job is impeding that ability to get onto social media. Another one that I think is really interesting is that it also reduces organizational commitment. So they have lower commitment to the values of the company or maybe the mission at large. So this also may be due to lower life satisfaction in general or other factors, but those are two primary things that are affected at the individual level when it comes to social media addiction. Um, when it comes to organizational impact, right? I think a lot of us have seen this where corporations are getting reputational damage from employees using social media in certain ways, right? So this comes down to what I think is really important that Ethical Digital is doing in creating corporate trainings. They're necessary. I wouldn't even say they're a good thing. They're necessary. Corporations need to be aware of social media. They need to be aware of how it's affecting employees. So I'm really glad that Ethical Digital is doing that. And I think that in addition to that, we also want to have conversations about personal social media use and work social media use because those are different. That's a boundary that I think needs to be a part of that discussion as well. Who am I outside of work and who am I at work?
I love that. I think you're absolutely right. There's that difference because if it makes you happy to be on all night, it's not causing you problems in your life, and it's not affecting your work the next day, then that's maybe, not as much of an issue. It was interesting. Some of what we uncovered too was really about the actual productivity that is happening for people. So it's not even just oh, I'm going to go check on this, and 45 minutes later you've gone down the Twitter rabbit hole, whatever the case is, and you've actually lost 45 minutes of time. Of course, that's a direct time cost, but it also takes a really long time. It can take up to 25 minutes to, once you get an interruption from your social media, say a little ping saying, hey, come over and look, there's a comment on your whatever. When that happens, it can take almost 25 minutes to get back in the headspace that you were in or working on when you were concentrating on your work. So there's some specific productivity issues that I think are really interesting. And actually, maybe we could just talk quickly about this too, because this does affect, both families and workplaces, is also the idea of sleep. We, in our case, we've uncovered a couple studies that teenagers in particular are affected, but I know of a lot of professional women who've been up until 2 a.m. who, got stuck into a TikTok rabbit hole. And, next thing they know, they have less sleep, which also definitely affects productivity too. So that's a definite issue there. Yeah. So do you have any other comments or anything on how social media is affecting sleep, or how you think that that's really impacting people's mental health?
I'm really glad you brought that up because people underestimate the power of sleep. If you haven't read this book called Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker, I highly recommend reading it. He's a sleep a study professional. He has a doctorate in this field and he has studied sleep. And I remember reading that book and how much it changed my life. I used to get migraines to the point where I used to have to go to the doctor. And after reading that book, I got about an hour extra sleep every night, and those went away. So when it comes to social media addiction, right, that negatively impacts sleep in a lot of ways. There's blue light, which most people are aware of, but what I think a lot of people don't consider are the psychological stimulations that occur too. So if you see, for example, something that is unsettling, maybe it's some news, right? Now you're starting to think about that. Maybe you see something personal, right? Maybe you see a comparison, right? One of the main negative things that we haven't talked about when it comes to social media in general is social comparison, right? So you see somebody with a bigger house or this or that, you start to worry about your own life, you have those comparisons, and that's keeping you up. So there are a lot of reasons and there are a lot of factors into why it would affect sleep. But yeah, it certainly is a big deal and is something to monitor.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. We're starting to get some questions in the chat. So even though we were going to wait till the end, I think some of these are really good and relevant to what we're talking about right now. So I'm gonna jump over there, and we'll answer a couple of those questions before we come back to our regularly scheduled ones. But in the meantime, we have Wilfred, who's asking if your work is collaborating with social media or marketing teams, how can you prevent being addicted to social media if this is what you're doing? I don't mind taking a quick stab at this one first, because this is
Of
an
course.
interesting balance that our team really walks, is the idea that our jobs are being online all the time for our clients and such. Now we take a different approach to social media. We really try to make sure everything's inclusive and that the content we're creating is very celebrational, inspirational, educational. And so those are some things that can help, is if you're not hanging out in the dark side or in the problematic side, the parts that are really bringing up those emotional responses. The other thing that we really try to do is be very conscious of our time on and off offline. So we actually have policies in our company that, that we speak about regularly is, trying to schedule, if you're, working after hours, you actually, schedule our communication so they don't show up for the other person until the next day. So nobody's checking their email thinking, oh, my boss might emailed me something I need to respond to tonight. So there's several things that we've done as well, with trying to walk that balance, just to try to be like, okay, it's our job being on social media, being aware, being involved in all those places and being aware of a lot of the trends. But we want to make sure that the people who are working with us are also, being healthy as they're going through that process. So a big part of that again is also education. Everybody's also, and we just talk about a lot of the mental health issues that, that could arise or be exacerbated by excessive social media use. So a lot of open conversations too are very helpful on our side. Did you have anything else that you'd like to add, Blake, and that you've seen in your experiences?
Well, you nailed it on the head with so many aspects. I think having that communication, I think having a social media policy in general is really helpful to address a lot of these issues and demarcating the difference between personal use and professional use. When it comes to a personal tip that I give everyone, whether it's adults, children, but particularly people working in this field and who are on social media a lot for their work, is after work to find a non-tech related activity to do. One of the things that I noticed when I worked with children with excessive mental health issues and trauma is that they did not have many hobbies. They spent time, their free time, on tech because this is kind of like an easy, mind numbing activity, right? And I worry that our society is going down that direction as well, not just children, but adults. So, one of the things that I do when I'm helping families, particularly, is I help parents, and I've done this with several that I can think of, help their children find replacement activities that are healthier for them, right? So I had worked with a mother who had a child who was destroying televisions because of video game rage, and he um, eventually found a one-to-one trainer after a lot of conversations with me and his mother, and now he does that routinely,
Mhm.
right? And that has replaced that time. So when it comes to our individual use after work, we want to consider what can we do to not only reduce tech use, but to increase our general fulfillment. Because if we do that, then we're less likely to use social media in negative ways.
I love that so much. And one thing I've really found is actually I just have tech fatigue after a whole day. And so people will often be like, how can you be a social media strategist? You're never online. But I'm like, oh, I'm online all day. But by the time the evening comes, I just have to. It's not really a choice. I just need that break from the screens. And so yeah, so I love that idea though too of just thinking about what are some of the other things I can be doing instead, because there's only so much time in the day. What else can I be doing to improve myself or contribute to my family or do something physical? So I love that answer. Next question that we got here too, which is interesting because I'm not sure I know the answer right offhand, but is it possible to become addicted to LinkedIn? And how would addiction to LinkedIn compare to other social media platforms such as Facebook or Instagram? I'll maybe let you take a quick run at this and I'll maybe think about an answer there too.
Yeah, so I haven't studied LinkedIn addiction, but I have read a lot about other app addictions. So there are scales for this. There's the Facebook addiction scale, there's the Instagram addiction scale, there's the problematic Tinder use scale. So I think that the LinkedIn addiction is possible. But I think one of the things that might, so I'm kind of trying to thinking off the cuff here. I will say a point made in an article that I thought was really interesting is that no one is addicted to Microsoft Excel. Nobody is addicted to, Word. Why? Right? What is different about these applications, right? They're technically tech. We can do things on them. We could theoretically get addicted to them, but we don't. So when you ask the question, can we get addicted to LinkedIn? The first thing that I think about is how all social media is shifting over to Reels and really forms of entertainment. So the more LinkedIn starts to shift over to that, I would think absolutely the question to that would be yes, because people are going to be in this infinite scrolling and they're going to have difficulty disengaging just like they do with Facebook, Instagram, or anything else that supplies these, continuous videos.
Yeah, I love that answer. And I think in a weird way that also may apply to Wilfred's question. And also there's Autumn had a follow-up that basically she's on an influencing side. She's an influencer. And so she'd love to be able to talk about preventing addiction when it's such a huge part of her day. And I love that question because we know that influencers are very, very impacted oftentimes by the swings and some of the emotional things that can be happening with these social media platforms. Did you have any, kind of further thoughts about that from an influencer standpoint?
Yeah, so there are studies that show that influencers or YouTubers are at a higher risk for social media addiction. One, because they're using it more often. And two, there can be some stresses related to that, right? So you're trying to keep a presence, you're trying to just work really hard to maintain that presence. So that can increase stress levels and increase using social media in unhealthier ways when you're not doing it for work. So the first thing that comes to mind is that there is a more of a predisposition to that. I think it kind of goes back to what we were talking about before in separating and creating boundaries between your personal identity and your work identity, right? So you may be an influencer for work, but who are you outside of work? This is a question I think people need to ask themselves and really think deeply about. And what are the differences going to be when you're using, let's say, social media in productive ways, right? Where you're reaching out to people, and what are the ways in which you would use it unproductively or unhealthily if you're talking about personal use? I think it's really important to ask yourself those questions and maybe even write them down.
I love that a lot. And I remember I got some advice in the early stages when I was online. And basically, the idea is that everybody's a whole piece of the pie, a whole pie kind of thing. And so, really choose what parts of your pie you want to be sharing. And so, for a long time, because of just many reasons, I didn't have anything about my children online ever. And I do more a little bit now because I can ask them their permission and that sort of thing. But in the meantime, I remember that was actually quite upsetting to people who would meet me to be like, wait, I think I know everything about you because of what's online. But they were just kind of getting parts of the pieces of the pie kind of thing that I wanted to be sharing publicly. And so for me, the way that I really have approached, my personal online work is, if it's work related, I love talking about it. I want to have that connection point. I'll even throw in a few sprinkles about me, like, I love to garden and things like that. But on the whole, there's a good chance you're probably not going to get the full Katrina, just from your social media platform. So I do think that that's a really interesting way of approaching it, is really looking at it to be like, what am I sharing about myself? What times am I sharing that? The other thing I would suggest too, Autumn, is thinking about, for that influencer standpoint, a lot of that is, about, okay, if I do this, I put this video out or this reel, I get this much return, so that you can measure that and then potentially sell your influence in the future. But the challenge would be, and the thing I would probably try to do if you're starting to feel very tired around those pieces, is scheduling a lot of your content if you can, so that you're not kind of having to be on someone else's schedule. You can kind of be doing it around your own times, and then also coming back, to it at scheduling times. So you're not like kind of like, hey, I put out a tweet, I now want to check it 15 times to see what kind of return it's received. It's something where it's like, no, only go back at the end of the day or something like that. So that might be another way of kind of approaching that addiction side when it's actually the work that you're doing, is really trying to schedule and compartmentalize the types of things that you're doing every day.
Yeah, could I add
Yes,
something here?
please. Yes,
Um,
yes, yes.
I think another really important thing for influencers or people in this field is to consider having strong relationships that are offline. So there is a concept that I'm sure some of you've heard. It's become more of a buzzword. It's called parasocial relationships. These are relationships that people are having that with YouTubers or people on Instagram. And what's different is back in the day, if you watched like a television show, you would see somebody and you might admire them, right? But it'd be more of a unidirectional relationship. Nowadays, with Instagram or with social media in general, people are having a two-way street. So influencers may ask a question, and now people can type in the chat. So people have this feeling that they're more connected than ever when it comes to celebrities. But this parasocial relationship can go in two directions. So if you're an influencer who doesn't have a lot of friends and you don't spend a lot of time connecting with people, you're going to be more likely to want to get that satisfaction from the people who are following you, right? And so I caution people to be aware of that and to think about how they can strengthen relationships with families and friends so they don't need to get that from their followers.
I love that. Yeah, no, that the idea, yeah, that's really, I think, ultimately what we're all looking for here is connection, right? If you get some information and some entertainment while you're at it, that's lovely. But really, when you're on those social media platforms and such, it's really about we're trying to connect with each other using a different form. And so there's a lot of beautiful connections that happen, but there's also, I love the way you put that. Was it the parasympathetic? What was the word?
Uh,
Yeah.
Parasocial relationships.
Parasocial relationships. I'm going to try to lock that one in because I think that's a really interesting term. But we have another question here, and I love this one. Are there daily screen time guidelines for children, teens, or adults? Everyone in our family, 2 adults and 3 teens, spend hours every day on a screen of some kind, phone, computer, TV. Is there an actual time period where screen time becomes unhealthy? And so I'll just, you maybe have some different research on this too, Blake. But I know with the research that we've done, they say half an hour a person. And I don't know, the average person spending over 2 hours a day. So there's a big dichotomy between what they're saying is healthy and what a lot of people are doing. What are your thoughts on this, Blaken?
So I get that asked this question a lot when it comes to tech. How much time should my child spend on social media or some type of tech? And I always invert the question. I ask people to consider how much time do you want your children doing other things? How much time do you want your child spending time outside? How much time do you want them talking to family members? How much time do you want them learning life skills like chores, right? And when you answer all of those questions and you address those, the tech stuff is going to be easy, right? You're going to feel more comfortable with your child who's using social media for 45 minutes or whatever time if you know that they're having a well-balanced life, that they're having friends, that they're getting good grades, right? So I think in addition to trying to think about, okay, what are the actual temporal limits, right? When we think about time, I think we also want to think about what are the other things we want our kids to be doing.
I love that. And we've recently even come up in our house where we're like forcing people, like, you're coming to watch a movie with us. So it's a different kind of screen, but it's just the idea of engaging with people. But I think this is really helpful for me too in my family life to be bringing some of these things forward as well. We actually have 2 really great comments from Mary Baker. One was referencing back to our LinkedIn conversation and basically kind of saying that there's always the idea that you want to be responding and building those relationships on LinkedIn to gain reach. And so it might be addictive and maybe worse. And so good point, Mary. And also another point, just an agreement that she's having a schedule really does help with this a lot. Get homework, dinner, us in time, and then the routine is so important. So I really love that. Really love
Um,
that insight.
so I'll tell another story too. When I first started in the field, I was a naive, 22-year-old, and I remember my boss saying that she wanted a schedule put up for the children. I remember thinking, why? It's not a big deal. And as I gained experience, I noticed the power of not only having a schedule, but for children particularly, for them to visibly see it. So when they can structure their day and see, okay, at 11 o'clock we're doing this, at 12 o'clock we're doing this, that provides a framework of safety and predictability. So that can be helpful just generally. When it comes to tech use, I generally would put it secondary to other tasks in the day. So when I worked with children, I did the Sunday shift, and there were 3 hours before lunch. And one of the things I always said to the boys I was working with is, you can pick a thing that you want to do. We're going to have an educational activity and we're going to have a physical activity. So the thing they always want to do is video games. So unsurprisingly, like 11 to 13-year-old boys always wanted to do that, which I was okay with. But I said that we would have to do something physical and educational first, right? And so what that did is they got the exposure to the positive things, right? The life skills, the emotional regulation that comes with doing those types of activities. And then they were rewarded for, with their tech use, because that's important as well. They should have fun. But I would recommend anybody creating schedules to kind of think about where you're putting the tech as well.
Love that. And I don't know, this is sort of off the cuff, but how can we extend that advice to workplaces, in the idea of scheduling your time online? Like, I think that that's sort of an interesting approach. I know for me, just because the way my days work out, I tend to have a lot of meetings. So I tend to check in at 9, around noon, at the end of the day, just because I'm working around meetings and it just so happens to be that way. But I'm wondering if there might be some benefit for workplaces to do that too, to basically, I know Shopify just announced that they were having no more meeting Wednesdays or something like that. And so, to reduce those in time. So it'd be interesting, for a workplace to be thinking about, okay, tech hour or something like that, rather than, kind of all the time options. But anyway, just musing out loud.
Yeah, yeah. We actually, so during the pandemic, the previous director of our program, when we were on screens so often, we would go to a nearby state park every now and then. So we would have our team meetings there. We would walk. I mean, we'd, be out in the open, so it was safer. But I really appreciated that because we got to see each other in person and just get a breath of fresh air, both literally and figuratively. So I think there are ways to incorporate that in the business world as well.
In the business community. I love that. Now we've had a lot of people saying great answer, for a lot of the questions for families, and that makes sense. Are there anybody else who has questions for themselves as an individual, as for their workplaces? Please do feel free to put them in the chat box, and we can address those. So I'm going to come back actually to some of the mental health things that we've uncovered with a bit of our research. One of them was kind of interesting. It was around the idea of FOMO, fear of missing out. And this is a new area. It's actually, I think it's only about 10 years old, the entire concept and the entire term. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on the time, but it's very new. And basically the idea is that, you're kind of adding some messaging and some, when you're putting things out, it's like, don't miss it, or, get your tickets now, they're almost sold out, and that kind of thing. But there's actually some really interesting research on how that makes people feel, like people with anxiety particularly can really kind of push them into more of an anxious space rather than the other. So that's one of the things that we've been sort of recommending for workplaces. Is there anything that you can think of off the top of your head, or anything that, you've seen that can kind of help with some of those small things that we do in workplaces that we don't even realize that we're doing that could be helping people with their mental health, and kind of through our internal maybe communications or maybe external communications with our social media? So any small things that you know of that can just help.
Yeah, I think that you first want to figure out boundaries, right? So, in boundaries, there's two elements to strong boundary formation. One is determining what those boundaries should even be. So you may have conversations with colleagues about, these are the times that I'm usually available. These are the times that I'm not. You may have that with your employer. And the second part of it is attached to this, but that's strong communication. I believe it's people's responsibility, one, to determine their boundaries, and two, to communicate them. People can't read your mind. So if you don't have the communication outlining what your boundaries are, what your preferences are, then you're not going to be able to engage in that working relationship that works for both parties, right? Because the other person may have some insight and suggest certain things as well. So I think that that's two things that really come up when it comes to workplace situations.
I love that. And yeah, the idea of just having that conversation can be so powerful in terms of, I'm not answering emails after 5. I love this work, but that's it. It's the time you get from me. It's amazing. Yeah. Okay, well, we're getting into our last 15 minutes here. If there's any remaining questions, please throw them in the chat. We're also, maybe we'll just sort of ask Blaiken for any final thoughts that he may have that he wants to be sharing. Like, where do you think people can be going if, they're in this conversation, they're thinking about it? What can they be doing for more resources or things that they can be doing to just help improve their life experience and using social media a little bit less?
Yeah, so I think there are a lot of resources. First, I would say people within your life. So have conversations with your partner, have conversations with your family members, right? That's a good place to start. Just bring up the issue in general. If you want resources in general, right, go to Ethical Digital. They have trainings available, especially if you're in the corporate sphere. Um, I think also, I one of the things I like to say to my clients at the Center for Tech Wellness is, in addition to working with technology addictions, I'm a therapist, right? So everybody has access, or not everybody, I should say, but a lot of people have access to mental health treatment, right? So to go seek, if you're feeling like you're having a problem with social media or other things, to make sure that you're going to look up therapists, maybe in your insurance network, or some places provide out-of-pocket sliding scales. So that would be another thing. There are other really interesting resources you can look into. We Are Social is a good data driven organization that provides a lot of information about social media use, um, and um, and the Center for Tech Wellness, right? I should say, coming to our website where we have information about this, and also our Instagram, the Center for Tech Wellness. I started that account with the Transform Your Feed series, and that is a detailed step-by-step process to help people remove negative aspects of their social media and replace it with positive. So just a quick example, for me, I noticed that I had a lot of junk cluttered from when I was in college, things I had liked that were routinely coming up on my feed. When I removed all of that, I replaced it with people who inspired me, particularly people who were doing small business therapeutic practices, so I could see what they're doing, for one, and two, I could be inspired by them. So we have a strong ability to create social media experiences that benefit our mental health as well.
I love that so much, Blake. And that's a really valuable tool for people because a lot of people don't realize that, algorithms basically, so I'll just do a little bit of a background on that. So a lot of social media platforms, a majority of them, they use algorithms. So they're using a lot of data points to organize what they're going to show you because their goal is for you to be coming back regularly. So that's what they're doing is they're selling your eyeballs and looking and the time you're spending on their platforms to advertise advertisers like us. And so in the meantime, they're going to want to show you all the things that make you happy. So they just go off of data points of what you've done before in an effort to kind of have you spend as much time as possible online. And so that's, I think, another thing that we didn't really touch upon here too, is that you're up against, some very sophisticated technology that wants your attention. So if you're, finding that you keep getting pulled back and, and are kind of like, hey, I'm trying to get away and it just keeps sucking me back in, that's actually, it's designed that way. It's intended to have you come back as much as possible. So some of the things that you can do around that is really being turning off your notifications so that it can't get a hold of your attention while you're doing other things. You can really, again, schedule your time online. And, like you're saying, and I love this, is actually influence your algorithms to say, here are the things that I want to be seeing in the type of person and the type of content I want to be consuming for me to live a good life. So I love that you've put that together, Blake. And I think that's a really, really valuable resource.
Thank you. Yeah, and another individual tip, real quick, is to recognize what I call the information entertainment bridge. So, the real spiral that people have with social media often is entertainment. I call it the entertainment spiral. The second you're on Reels, you know you're in trouble, right? Because you're going within the next 5, 10 seconds, and then it's like, oh, I'll just watch another more or another one. I'll just watch more and more, keep going on. So, often that occurs because people are seeking information. They start off seeking information. So they may have a question about work. They may have a question about the weather. Who's that celebrity dating, right? You look up something and then you're shifting over into an app and now you're shifting over into Reels, right? And then you're stuck there for 30 minutes to an hour, right? So recognize that moment that you've got the information. It's like you gotta get it and run. I don't know what the term is, get the money and run. It's kind of similar. Get the information and run, right? You got it, get out.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love that. Okay, and we have a comment here from Mary Baker. She also gave a suggestion about books, Teaching or Parenting with Love and Logic. Great books about working together. And another question that's directly related to the market and marketing and how do we create marketing that doesn't add anxiety? And so I really love this question because basically the question is just don't use FOMO in that particular example. As marketers, it's a very effective tool. We know that it's going to get people here, to events, to different things. However, as marketers, I also think we have a responsibility to do better. And once we're aware that FOMO is an issue, and that, we can decide at that moment, do we want to continue to perpetuate that and make people feel bad when they're seeing our posts, or do we want to do better? So in our case, even we had this event, we want people here. We want to be sharing our information with as many people as possible, but we were able to do that completely without the FOMO side. And so basically that's the idea, is to try to avoid you're going to miss it if you don't do it now kind of messaging into join us and have it be more inclusive and be a part of this thing, more of an invitation to be a part of something rather than if you're not in, you're out kind of messaging. And so for me, that would actually probably be my response is like, as marketers, once we're aware, let's just not use it. Yes, it works, but we don't have to use it. We can do better. I love that. Okay. And then I also love Mary. There's a follow-up question there, but she's interested in learning more about kind of doing these things and marketing certification and that sort of thing. So Mary, I'm going to get you to just send us a note at hello@ethicaldigital.ca. And we'd love to talk to you further because if you're passionate about this, we'd love to figure out ways to, to get a community together who's also passionate. So that's amazing. Yeah. Okay, we've got time. Oh, we got some, thank you very much from Mary. So we've got some time for maybe one more question, but in the interim, I'm going to share a little bit more about our training and the different information that we're offering. We know how important this is. Thank you so much, Vida. And so we know how important it is to just be thinking about this, and we want to be bringing it right into your corporation or your group, your organization. So whether you're a small business, medium-sized business, large business, we'd love to be working with you to be sharing this information so that we can be much more healthy as organizations, as an individuals who are working in these organizations as well. So you can see through this training, there's a lot of really interesting things. A lot of the things we're doing is really sort of a self-analysis and testing yourself, going through these questions of, do I have an issue? Am I crossing the line in terms of my potential addiction or problematic use? And really having some very specific, once you understand your own experiences with social media, what can we be doing for our organizations and for others if we're creating content? So really would like to welcome you to be looking at the well-being training. And in order to do that, we'll just go to the next slide, please, Vida. We actually have 3 courses that have been put together around this. So the first one is really around the productivity. So we're really focused on how the social media is affecting your sleep, affecting your time away, affecting your actual tasks that you're doing. So this can be a really valuable training for organizations who just want to be more productive in general and have a healthier workforce. The mental health and protecting our well-being. So, we're aware that there's correlations between too much social media use and how it's affecting people. So what can we be doing in our day-to-day around some of these very specific health issues like anxiety and depression to, if we're creating content, make sure that we're creating content that's, healthy. If we're consuming content, being able to do that in a way that doesn't exacerbate some of those mental health wellness issues. The other third part is around privacy ads and the pursuit of connection. And this is really about how social media works. Why are we all on here, and what can we be doing to actually find more connection online and be using that as a tool to be connecting with people, as we talked about earlier. Like ultimately, when we boil everything down, that's what we're all trying to do is, yes, you may want that education, but we really want to be having that connection. So we have got these 3 training courses, and the next slide, please, there, Vida. And I'll leave this on while Blaiken and I are finishing up, but you are welcome, and we'll be sending this code out through email as well. We are doing 50% off this training for people who are in on this webinar. We really just wanted to, again, we want to share this with as many people as possible, and we just think this information is really important for the way that we're all functioning in our society, both online and offline. So we would love to be working with you to help your company and your employees be more healthy, especially in the mental health area, be more productive, and really understand our role in social media and the future of social media. We're the first generation creating for this space. We need to be very conscious about how we build it for future generations. So I'd like to thank, we'll leave this up for a little while, but I'd really like to thank Blaiken for spending his time with us today and sharing this information. Very valuable, it came right from the ground. You've been working in it for years before anybody was even aware that this was a thing. And so we're very, very pleased that you could join us. And I just felt like the information was incredibly valuable. Do you have anything that you wanted to wrap up with, Blaiken?
I just wanted to thank Ethical Digital, for inviting me here. I think I love how you're focusing on connection. When I was thinking about our conversation, one of the things that came to mind was our our even being here right now is a product of our connection through social media,
Yes,
right? We have
yes.
reached out to one another. I think that shows the power of what social media can be if we're using it in healthy and productive ways. So I think of it as connect before scrolling, right? We have opportunities to do both. Make sure you're reaching out and connecting to people. So I really value our relationship, and I think that we'll all be able to continue making connections if we reach out and we make that effort.
I love that so much. I forget we've never met. It feels like I know you.
Yep.
Yes, no, this is a unique time and space, and we're all very fortunate to be a part of it. And I really thank you so much, Blake, and for joining us and sharing your knowledge. Thank you so much. Have a really great day, everybody. We'll be sending out emails with some follow-up information, and we're looking forward to potentially working with you on some trainings for your staff as well. So thank you very much, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks.